Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel or on the podcast if you're listening. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by the author of a book that we're going to be talking about very shortly and the former editor of Rouleur and Andy McGrath. Great to have you here. And how are you and where are you? I know you've well traveled.
Good to be here. Yeah, that's the best pronunciation of Rouleur that I've ever heard. So well done, firstly, for that. I am currently in South London, which is my home, but I was in Bari at the weekend for pleasure, not for work. The other side of Italy for Strada Bianchi.
But anyways, the book that you've written is about Frank Vandenbroucke. A lot of people in Belgium know who he is. Well, if you're just getting into cycling, you might not be familiar with him. But the book, we might as well start with the title, God is Dead. What does that kind of refer to?
Well, Vandenbroucke his nickname was God, from some of his strongest fans, which is that's a pretty great nickname to have. Not just a nod to his talent, which was incandescent, in the early 90s, mid 90s when he came through, but how he looked on a bike, he was beauty personified on a bicycle, really, like a very smooth pedaling style. His body didn't move much, long legs, like a long torso. He just rode the way that people, like in your head when you're riding a bike, you want to ride like Frank Vandenbroucke, but obviously the reality is that I don't. Like I look like kind of like a barrel, very ungainly. So God is Dead, obviously it's quite literal because sadly Vandenbroucke died, spoiler alert. Also, there's a bit of a link to Nietzsche there that I won't go too much into, but it links a little bit into that. And his autobiography was called Ik ben God niet, which means I'm not God in Dutch. So there's a lot of links there. I think it's a pretty punchy title.
So, well, looking back to like the beginning with him, you met with his family members. How long did it kind of take the whole book as well? And how many times were you back and forth to Belgium?
A lot, like probably over half a dozen trips, just driving around. Really, I covered a lot of ground. Had a lot of chips and Belgian beer. There's worse places to do book research, let me tell you, because Vandenbroucke's from the Franco-Belgian border, and I mean right on the border. Like you can walk to the French border from his little village. It's like a farming village, really, in the middle of nowhere called Klugsteert, it's kind of in between Ypres, which is kind of a war tourism centre, and quite near to Lille, the French city. And if you don't, as his cousin told me for the book, if you don't have a reason to go to Klugsteert, you don't go there. Basically half the time I'd be getting stuck behind farming traffic doing 20 miles an hour. But it's a typical Belgian place. You've got like 4 bars in a very small centre, a church, a supermarket. And I would always go there for every trip. Like even though I'd be going all around the place, like sometimes meeting his sister, who still lives there. His uncle, Jean-Luc, was a prodigy in the 1970s and the early 80s. He was one of the biggest talents in Belgian cycling. I met him, and I'd be going everywhere. Like went to Liège, Bastogne, Liège, and I went to all the famous places where Vandenbroucke did incredible things on the bike. But I would always come back every single time. I'd make sure I went back to his hometown because that's what grounded him. That had a huge impact on him. He was just a village boy who was born to pub owning parents, made good basically. He put the village on the map. But yeah, we should explain too, like for people who have no idea who Frank Vandenbroucke is, there are parallels to Remco Evenepoel. If you know cycling at the moment, quite scary parallels, like in that Vandenbroucke also turned pro when he was 19 in the mid-90s, and he was the youngest Belgian pro for 50 years. And he was very charismatic, and he was very good immediately. And the Belgian press hyped him. I think hype is a fair word, but they're also responding to what he'd done as a junior, what he'd done as an amateur. He gave great quotes to everyone on TV. He was bilingual, which goes a long way in Belgium, as a country that has 2 languages. And he quickly became very popular and joined Mappe in the mid-90s, who were the dominant team of that era. They were winning 80, 90, 100 races per season. That put him on the cusp of superstardom, really. But with Mappe, he was really in a team of superstars, and he wanted lone leadership. So he joined Cofidis in 99. And in some ways, briefly, that was a good move. And in some ways, it wasn't such a good move. And that's kind of where he always had troubles, coming from a dysfunctional background. But that's really where the problems started in earnest.
Yeah, what do you kind of think this is? There's been, well, Marco Pantani is also kind of a character that springs to mind. But yeah, it just seems like so many of these great riders are thrusted into this, like you said, godlike pedestal or whatever you will, and then some of them can't really deal with the attention, the fame, the money. And do you think it is something to do with the background or where they're coming from?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think in some ways it's quite a Belgian thing, but don't get me wrong, that their obsession, their fandom for the sport is incredible and beautiful and should be encouraged around the world, really. And they helped to lift Vandenbroucke up, and other stars too, like say Remco or Wout van Aert or whoever, with their attention, whether that's from the fans or or from the media. And that's a really good thing. The problem is when it starts to go downhill, certainly I could possibly see problems for Remco in the future, just in that I don't see how he can win, because since he was 19, the Belgian press has been saying he's the next Eddie Merckx. He's going to win the Tour de France, or he's going to be very good. So if he somehow lives up to those huge expectations, it's a case of, well, we expected this, we told you so. If he doesn't, then it's somehow, wasted talent, fall from grace, lots of pressure anyway. And for any young talent from any young country, in any era of cycling, especially now, they don't need pressure. Like, there's a lot we see on TV of bike riders, and it looks vaguely glamorous, I think, and we see them racing their bikes mainly, but you don't see what happens behind the scenes. Like, you don't see them like alone in their hotel room. You don't see what goes on inside their head, basically. And certainly with Vandenbroucke, he basically needed to win to exist. That was his psychological problem. And obviously, we know cycling that even if you win 20 races like a season, you're incredible. And he certainly wasn't doing that. And if he didn't win his big targets, he could be crestfallen and really it could take him off the rails psychologically, mentally. It's quite complex to explain, but he'd always been in an environment where he was an incredible talent. He'd win the local darts tournament, not just cycling. Like, he was national cross country champion as a teenager in Belgium. He's someone who picked up like 5-6 languages during his life fluently. He was like an autodidact. A genius is what the psychologist kind of described him as. But he was also someone with flaws who made mistakes, which is what young people are going to do, obviously, as well. And when they're in the public eye, it's amplified and noticed, and the spotlight was on him when that happened, which made it, I think, even more painful for him. He was also, we have to mention it, that he was racing in one of the most nuclear eras in professional cycling. He turned pro in '94, which is probably the worst time you could turn pro, because EPO was just rampant. And I think it would be scandalous if there had been many contenders from that area who weren't using performance enhancing drugs. That's what we know now. And it seems that he had to resort, or chose to resort to that, to keep up. That was a strange moral maze of the time, that it was almost pragmatic. If you don't cheat, you won't keep up, and then you won't get to do your dream, and you won't have any money for the future. Like, it's a bit of a head scrambler, isn't it? And I really hope, I think we can say with some certainty that it's not as bad now, and there's not systems and teams for doping. But it also means that psychologically, when you're in a culture where drug use is encouraged, and everyone's doing it, you get habits and you get behavior patterns that you're stuck with. And then when the drugs, recreationally too, because Vandenbroucke was all gas, no brakes. Like, he'd also be up mixing sleeping pills and alcohol with teammates in Cofidis. He was, partying by day and winning bike races by night. So what I mean to say is that he is culpable. So you can't condone everything here. But when you're in that era, you get these habits, you get these addictions that are very hard to cure. And it's even harder when you feel left by yourself, when you have a fall from grace, which is kind of what happened to him.
Yeah, that makes sense. And being labeled a genius and having talent so early on as well, and being praised all the time, and then, as you said, you're in your hotel room or you're not being praised, that must just, the ego or whatever must just hit the wall completely.
Absolutely. Yeah, I spent a lot of time with his psychologist. It's a guy called Jeff Brouwers, who actually, working with Vandenbroucke was, for Brouwers, the start of a 20-year relationship with Quickstep, with the team we now know as Quickstep. So he's worked with countless other athletes, and Vandenbroucke is still one of the ones he's been most impressed by, and he's done things that he's never done with any other athlete. And I was talking to him kind of about modern cycling recently, and he was saying that he thinks the psychological challenges are even greater on riders. I'm talking about why he thinks Quick Step have been, so prolific over the years. And he was saying it's a kind of intrinsic motivations are really important. That it's interesting that when most riders leave Quick Step, they win less or they stop winning entirely. The one exception he mentioned was Matteo Trentin, interestingly, but you can't be thinking about the money or motivated by the money. That's a part of the process. Basically, he's all about staying in a kind of winning culture. And yeah, it's just about having that structure. He was trying to give Vandenbroucke structure, but one of the quotes he gave me was that Vandenbroucke lived his life without a parachute. He didn't know what he was doing, the next day. So I think it's definitely better now. Like also the mental care that pro teams have, especially the kind of richest ones, your kind of Jumbo Vismas, Ineos Grenadiers, UAE. I would expect they all have sports psychologists there every single day of every Grand Tour to help their stars, and that's how it should be.
Is there anything? Well, you were saying with the mental support as well, but is there any way, like you've been really close to the cycling pros, being with Roller? Do you think Frank Vandenbroucke has kind of been used as a lessons learned kind of thing? We need to nurture these highly talented cyclists and try and steer them away from Marco Pantani, that kind of thing.
I think it's a tricky one, because in some ways, like for some riders, like the younger ones, they weren't even barely around when Vandenbroucke was racing at his height. So in some ways, it could seem like a tale from yesteryear. But on the other hand, there's still 30 riders in the bunch who raced with Vandenbroucke. Like he's not yesterday's man. Like Chris Froome and Jan Bakelands, like for example, they all raced with him. Like at the end of his career. But still, I don't think there are, DSs going around telling precisely the story of Frank Vandenbroucke, being like, this is a cautionary thing you have to avoid. But that's an era in cycling where there were three big names who died in sad circumstances through really ready to addiction. Pantani, Vandenbroucke, and Jose Maria Jimenez, the Spanish climber. And you put those together, maybe you combine even Philippe Gaumont, who was Vandenbroucke's teammate at Cofidis, and a bad influence on him. And you kind of look at it like as a big picture, and there's kind of a systematic poisoning almost, like of a generation of bike riders. But I think it's clear that should be avoided. But on the other hand, there's loads of bike riders who I spoke to, modern ones currently, about Vandenbroucke, who love him, who idolize him, who certainly idolize that 1999 Liège-Bastogne-Liège, which was his landmark win, where he said days before the race, I'm going to win by attacking at this house number on the Côte de Saint-Nicolas, who apparently did a 1 hour training ride a few days kind of before, when his teammates were doing 3 or 4 hours. And he just said, I don't need to, because I'm going to win. And the crazy thing is that he did win, and he attacked almost where he said he would, in fact slightly early. That whole display that day, kind of on the bike, where he eviscerated his rivals, it's both so beautiful and so impressive, and quite dark when you think he's going up La Redoute in the big ring, and you know what's in his system. And I went to La Redoute, I could barely walk it, let alone ride it, let alone ride it in a big ring. So it's a tricky one, because it is beautiful in some ways, but of course he's a bit of a kind of emblem for the excesses of that bad era in cycling.
So anyways, that's basically it for the book that I encourage you to have a good read of. I've found it thoroughly interesting. God is Dead, and of course the subtitle is The Rise and Fall of Frank Vandenbroucke, Cycling's Greatest Wasted Talent. And Andy has very kindly donated a copy, so we're going to raffle that off for all our special channel members as well. So look out for that. And Andy, do you mind holding it up, because it couldn't quite fit in my bag for Paris-Nice.
No worries.
There we go. So check that out. We'll leave a link down below as well. So so thanks for that, Andy. Thank you for your time, and I'm sure we'll see you again on the channel very soon. So thank you for watching and listening as well. If you're on the podcast, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.